Good morning and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining our webinar. I'm Jeff Antos from the Weinberg Group, and I'll be moderating today's session on clinical data management and the cult of quality. For more than 30 years, the Weinberg Group has provided regulatory and compliance consulting to our pharma and biotech clients. Headquartered in Washington, D.C., we work with large and small companies worldwide and provide full regulatory outsourcing to a number of clients. I know you're going to enjoy our speaker today. Nick Cohen, who heads our clinical quality practice, has a decade of clinical research experience at organizations such as Johns Hopkins and Sanofi of Venice. He has helped scores of clients in all phases of drug development across numerous therapeutic areas. Nick?
Thank you very much, Jeff. Hi, my name is Nick Cohen, and I'll be the speaker for this webinar on clinical data management and on quality. So I wanted to start us off by talking a little bit about the goals of this webinar. Before I do this, I want to preface this by saying there are a lot of slides. It's going to be a pretty fast-moving webinar, and my intention is not for me to sort of teach you the A to Z of every quality orientation, but to give you an orientation to some of them. Really want to talk about what is meant by quality, what we think. I want to discuss the world of quality. Quality is its own branch, as many of you know, but quality is more than that. There are government organizations that do nothing but quality. There are independent organizations. There are for-profit organizations, and so on and so forth. I want to talk about quality as it pertains to clinical data, and then I want to put all this together and examine the elements of the clinical data lifecycle as from a quality orientation. And what I hope you get out of this is perhaps a different orientation to how you're used to looking at quality, maybe more of a holistic perspective. So a little bit about my background. As Jeff alluded to, I have worked in academia and I have worked with industry. I've been on the other side of the fence. I've worked in basic benchtop research. I very briefly had a stint as a research manager at a site, so I know that perspective. I monitored in academia as well as project managed. I worked for a CRO doing monitoring, project management, and auditing. I also worked for a political organization involved in research, looking at research quality, and have worked and managed the GCP auditing program, which is really more a quality program. We do any GXP you can imagine, anything from quality analysis to audits, SOP writing, and the like. Anything you can kind of imagine in the quality realm of pharmaceutical industry. So with that being said, I want to move into what is quality. Quality is a really hard thing to define because we all kind of know what quality looks like, but we'd be very hard-pressed to explain it without using the word itself. You can see by the dictionary, it's pretty vague. It's an essential characteristic. A lot of organizations say that quality is a satisfied customer. The more the orientation we're going to take in this. The American Society for Quality says that it's the totality of features and characteristics of a product or service that bears on its ability to satisfy given needs. Again, a very long-winded way of saying quality is all about the customer satisfaction. Essentially, quality is that the product you make does what it's supposed to do, and that it does it that way every time it's done. We get a little sticky when we talk about high quality because we usually define something like that in relationship to a low quality thing, and that can get a little that kind of skew our orientation because we tend to think of quality in terms of black and white. And we really shouldn't do that. Every monitor who's gone through a training program hears about, sites falsifying data. Well, what do you do when you go to a site that is putting wrong values in but thinks they're doing it the right way? In their mind, they have high quality. In your mind, they have low quality. It's a little different than it's a little more gray. So 6, just want you to kind of sit here and think for a sec, what does quality look like? You might think of an expensive car, a nice house. You might get down to the lower level of, plumbing that works, or, a really good piece of food. That's kind of the orientation most people take towards this. You wouldn't necessarily say that a fast food hamburger was a high quality hamburger, but in comparison to a very, very low quality piece of meat, it might be considered high quality. So just kind of take that perspective into this and try not to be very so absolute. So what about compliance? Quality usually gets lumped in with compliance. Compliance is really just the act of conforming to a standard or requirement. When we say we're GCP compliant or FDA compliant, it means that we satisfy the requirements in whichever regulation we're talking about. I want you to think about this, though. To a regulatory agency, such as the FDA, there's no such thing as being more compliant. It's a black or white deal to them. And the FDA typically measures compliance as the absence of problems in a lot of situations, which it can really skew with the quality orientation because a lot of people out there who aren't very good at their job but just sort of have been lucky enough not to have something bad happen. So people who might do a lot more work might be on the same level of compliance as another group. Just a quick picture on quality. Quality has 2 perspectives, and really should keep these both in mind. One is from the producer, the other is from the consumer. As producers, which most of us tend to be if we're working in the R&D side, we really need to think about the consumer being ultimately the regulatory agency. I would say ultimately the people who use the medications, but that's neither here nor there with relation to R&D. We want to think about what do our reg agencies want. So designing something we're really happy with that they're not terribly impressed with could be a waste of our time, could add no quality to it, so to say. So keep that in mind. So easy to think of what poor quality means. Lose business. Your reputation is damaged. You could be liable for damages, productivity, and at the bottom line, financial loss. Okay. Customer. This is a hard concept for a lot of people in this world. We tend to pigeonhole ourselves. When we think of customers and quality, we really need to think of the end user of what we're doing. Ultimately, it's all about data. That's what the FDA's or any other regulatory agency is concerned about. And safety is data, so think of them as one of the same. We're designing an EDC system. A lot of people don't think about people actually using the EDC system. They just sort of, go through their requirements and the system works, so I'm happy. Well, if I'm the one doing something, I'm not actually the end user. So it really should be all about what does the other person want. Kind of the same thing with monitoring plans. Oftentimes, those aren't designed by the monitors doing the studies. Why? Those people are the ones who are going to be going out on the front lines. They should understand what they're doing, and in order to do the work at the level you want them to be. So just a thought, involve people whenever possible. And something we always do here at the Weinberg Group, whenever somebody comes to us with a question, we always ask them, what do you want to accomplish? It's a thought, and it's a thought that most people in this industry don't really put in mind. Again, you can get kind of very siloed in your own angle. So don't be afraid to ask that question. Don't be afraid to ask people what are their expectations. Fine. Customer satisfaction. So again, if you go back to that other picture, we think about 2 things. Conformance means that the product's being produced as it was designed to be produced. And quality, features. Why do you buy one car over another? Because it has better seats, or it's more safer, or so on and so forth. So we think about the attributes of our program as well as the attributes of the product we're ultimately making. Quick note on accuracy and precision. People crisscross these all the time, but kind of to go back to basic lab science, accuracy is correctness. Precision is consistency. So when I say accuracy, tasks are being done as they're supposed to be done. Consistency, they're being done the same way over time. And don't get too siloed on that picture of D. Believe it or not, most quality operations operate at their height of effectiveness when they're around B. But a little note about perfection in a bit. So elements of quality. These are just some things to your consideration. Timing, completeness, courtesy we don't think about, but the happier people are to work with us, the better our work ends up being. Consistency, we talked about. Accessibility. Again, you have an EDC system that gives you the outputs you want, but users have an impossible time using it. It's not a high-quality system. In your mind it might be, but again, think about the customer. Accuracy we talked about, and responsiveness. A good quality system has to be able to respond to questions and it has to be able to change. There's a reason why we all write these change control SOPs. They're not so it'll take a month and a half for a change to get made. It's so a change can be made rather quickly as the study needs dictate. Additional characteristics of quality. These I do want to spend a little bit of time on. 3 things I want you to think of as you think about your quality operations. 1, user versus the system. Essentially, your quality program really has 2 components. It has the people doing the work and the program itself. If the program is not of high quality, the people can do the best work possible, and they won't produce high quality results. Similarly, if the system's excellent but the people aren't good, you're not going to get a high quality operation out of it. When most people do their quality control and assurance exercises, they spend far too much time focusing on the user and not on the system. If you can design a better system, you don't have to train the user. Just a thought. The other, external versus internal. It's a relationship to the project work. And I really want to think about who is on the project team and who is an external viewer. I would argue that if you use a CRO and the CRO finds the sites, does the monitoring, so on and so forth, that the people at the sponsor company end up becoming external to it. That isn't to say you're not involved or you're not of interest. It's just that to the project team, you're not going to be really viewed as an on-the-ground member. So you need to think about your needs and their needs. And if you design quality to overly focus on yourself as the external viewer, you're going to hurt the internal customer. The same thing with the internal customer. They shouldn't be allowed to go off by themselves and do things without telling you. But do think about that orientation. That has a lot to do with how you manage monitoring, auditing, error checks, all of that. And quality control versus quality assurance. I'll talk about this a little bit later, but quality control is typically something done by the project team. It's typically done by people assigned to the project who have some sort of vested interest in it. Quality assurance is traditionally done by an independent third party. So you may think you're doing QA, you might be doing QC. Just a thought. Okay? All right. So user versus system. We talked about this. User is typically an action, system is typically a framework. A protocol is a system. An EDC system is a system. SOPs are a system. Users. A monitor is a user. An auditor is a user. A project manager is typically a user. A research system is a user. There are people who operate within the framework. Internal, external. Again, internal, you're on the ground. You're either collecting data, you're reviewing data, so on and so forth. External, a lot of data analysis is usually thought of as an external activity. People looking at quality who aren't necessarily involved in the study operations are external, even though many times they think of themselves as being internal. But a bit about that in metrics going forward. Don't harp too much about it, but just understand that what you think may benefit you may actually constitute a considerable burden to someone who's in the project. You end up kind of breaking it, so to say. Simple quality terms. Quality improvement, QI. That's a purposeful change to improve the reliability of an outcome. Control, or QC, is an ongoing effort to maintain the integrity of a process, and quality assurance is basically a planned or systemic action to provide confidence. That's sort of a good indication of QA, in that QA by itself doesn't really directly institute change. QA typically allows you to collect information to use the change later. Okay. A little bit about QC versus QA. Again, QC, same department. QA, external. Consider them separately. They're part of a continuum, but you're typically going to do a lot more QC than you are QA. So kind of think about that. Don't confuse your QC and your QA. QC has a vested interest. QA does not. It should not. Is the employee a member of the project team? For example, monitoring. Monitors are assigned to projects. Monitors are QC. I know it's a little confusing because somebody at a site doing QC will typically think of the monitor as QA because they're external to them, but they're really all internal to the project. It's really a QC check. And QC is more readily biased. It should be readily biased because you want the project to succeed. That isn't to say that QA doesn't want the project to succeed. It's just that there shouldn't be any bias in QA to change how they do any of their, how they do anything. Monitors doing QC have to get judged by how good their sites are doing, which is something that QA does not really suffer from. Just some alerts about monitoring versus auditing. Same stuff that we've been talking about before. Just monitoring as being more dependent and project-focused. Auditing as being more independent and holistic. Auditing doesn't have to be a part of the site file or the trial master file. Now, a list of audits does have to be included, but the actual report doesn't. Okay, so now we've gotten through some basic stuff. I want to talk a little bit about quality, and what quality is, and quality orientations and quality thoughts. What do I call it a cult? And I don't mean a cult as an insulting term. It's a cult as in there are people who really believe they eat, sleep, and breathe quality. Just as in any faith, there are people who are true believers and live their whole lives by the code of the faith. There are people who attend services on one day a week or holy days and basically kind of adhere to the basic tenets of it. Quality can be done either way, and a lot of these orientations look at it that way. There are many different faiths or orientations to quality. We'll talk about a few of them here. And quality is a very personal thing. With the anecdote earlier about kind of a monitor being unhappy with a site's work, people may think they're doing, it's really difficult to deal with somebody actually who thinks they're doing an excellent job, and from their perspective they are, but from yours they aren't. Unfortunately, when it comes to quality, no one can really be an atheist. It's something that happens whether you want it to or not. Not that that's a bad thing. I'm not going to go through the quality management system, but these are the elements of what a quality management system should look like. So when you're thinking about your quality SOPs, this is what they should explain in conjunction with your quality policy. And I would think of the quality manual as the SOPs. Okay, so what's a quality management system? Essentially, it's a set of procedures, policies, and rules aimed at continuously improving performance. Focuses on customers, but addresses the needs of all stakeholders. The all stakeholders thing is very important. That often gets lost in the shuffle. Okay, so I'm going to give 5 examples. ISO, Six Sigma, Kaizen, Lean, and Pdca. You might have heard some combinations of these. That's entirely possible. Just as there are different splinter groups of different faiths, it's completely possible to combine almost all of these. I would say, except for, I'd say Kaizen and Six Sigma tend to be kind of diametrically opposed to each other, but I'm sure you could find a way to meld the two if you wanted to. Okay, ISO. So you've probably all heard of ISO 9000. It's the quality management system ISO. It's focused on customer standards with regulatory obligations, makes it a big favorite of government agencies, and a big favorite of groups that have to work with government agencies. So you'll often see a lot of groups that work in the international space being ISO 9000 compliant or certified. Important to know that the International Organization for Standardization, which is ISO, certifies, or I should say accredits bodies to certify, does not do any certification itself. A lot of government agencies have stated that they won't hire anyone who isn't, they give you plenty of options, but ISO is usually the most popular. And its orientation is really more about improvement cycles. It's very, it's kind of robotic. I mean, that's what I think of when I think of ISO, and that's the way it's designed. ISO probably matches most closely what most people in the GMP space are used to. And that's just a picture of what ISO would say. So it sees lots of measurement, looking at resources, puts a lot of emphasis on management. So Six Sigma. Six Sigma is really focused around errors and minimizing variability. Six Sigma is often known as a command and conquer kind of approach because it puts the management in the seat of leadership and really expects people to sort of fall in line and agree with their philosophy. 2 acronyms, DMADV and DMAIC. One's for developing, one is for improving existing products. These are probably pretty familiar to you. Just a graphical iteration of it. So the idea is to state what you want, measure it, see if you're getting it, try to improve it, and then to control for changes so that you don't just have that one-time improvement. Kaizen is a very feel-good approach to quality. It's very focused on quality improvement as being something that all individuals do. It is quality of tasks shared by all employees, not just leaders. Big focus on the avoidance of unnecessarily hard work. Unnecessarily hard as in you're spending too much time on something when it could be done more easily. There's a lot of individual experimentation encouraged. So you have these events called Kaizen blitzes where If a problem is found, you'll literally shut down a production line. The entire group will talk about what change should happen, and then you implement the change. For those of you who watch maybe Office Space, TPS reports, now thought of as Total Production Systems, were actually originally named Toyota Production Systems, because that's where this approach was taken from. And it's often credited with bringing them into basically making them into a world-class automotive manufacturer. Kaizen, a lot of these pictures are going to look very similar to each other. So, don't be too surprised on that. Lean is basically a trim the fat. And lean is focused on what the end customer wants, so it's removal of anything that is wasteful to that. So if you think about this towards submissions, if the FDA wants 10 variables, you give them 10 variables. You don't give them 12. And you have to look at it from the viewpoint of the customer, which you probably should do in all orientations, but lean especially. It's preserving value with less work, and they're very focused on the least. Lean system going to look a lot like the other ones. Pdca, really simple, plan, do, check, act. Probably sounds a lot like the other ones, is very similar to them, where the phrase CAPA comes from, because you are supposed to request a corrective analysis and implement a preventive action. Okay. Picture's a little blurry, but it looks kind of similar to the others, just instead of one cycle, think of two. And Pdca tends to think of these cycles as being in isolation of each other. Okay, so that's a very brief orientation to quality. If you want to know any more about those, tons of resources on the internet. There are classes you can take, so on and so forth. I want to talk about sort of practical quality. And again, still talking about quality in kind of a nebulous way, not necessarily related to data, but just in general. Quality goes on a continuum. If any of you have ever heard you can have it, fast, cheap, or good, the good would be quality, and that's very true. Simple fact of the matter is that quality has a negative correlation with progress. There is just no way to be 100% quality and have any sort of a decent timeline, because you'll be doing way too many checks to make sure things are perfect. But you can't have, if you have no quality, you have no control. So I like to think of people's orientation to dating. Maybe you know someone who will go on a date with anybody they know. They'll become serious with anybody they know, and they don't tend to have very long-lasting relationships. They don't tend to produce very high-quality products, as in the relationship itself. Then if you take the 100% approach, these are people who never go on dates because they can't find the perfect person to go out with. There's obviously got to be something that works. The problem with 100%, and the reason why it isn't feasible, is because of error. Error happens, and a lot more of it than you might think. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's the human component. So we'll talk a little bit later about sort of what's acceptable error, but just understand there's no way to be 100% on the quality continuum, and there's no way you'll survive if you're at the zero. Quality is going to be a sweet spot. You have to, good quality efforts allow an acceptable amount of error with an acceptable, with an acceptable rate. In data quality, we'll talk about, error per 1,000 or times to entry and things like that. And, often a lot of us are guilty at setting those things extremely tight because we think it's necessarily going to enhance quality. But at the end of the day, we end up having to perform more operations to seek those rates. So there's no one, the statement of don't try to be a special snowflake is more so that the rules apply to all of us. Unfortunately, there's no way, we might think we're going to make the one quality operation that defies the rules. We're not going to. And it's not because we're not good. It's because it's just impossible to be perfect. And the marginal benefit you get from more and more and more time just exponentially decreases. Think about standard deviations. Moving from 1 to 2 gets you about 25%. Moving from 2 to 3 is 4%. Not a lot. Depending on the cost, it may not be worth it. And if you don't know where you are, an external audit can be great. Someone can come in, can look at your operation, can look at your vendors, and can tell you how you look from another person's eyes, which is a very valuable experience. Okay. General considerations. Kind of harping on what I said earlier, the more quality you have, the longer time it's going to take to finish your product. More QC typically has an effect of delaying the process much more than QA does. QA is something that should be planned, and it should work seamlessly in with quality. We all have the for cause. That's completely understandable, but QA shouldn't be an afterthought. It shouldn't be stop the presses and let's have somebody come in and look at it. Thinking of, for example, you think of a database lock can be looked at as a QA, an interim analysis. Database lock should be something that's planned for. It shouldn't just sort of appear. Everyone shouldn't have to sort of scramble to, prep for a database lock. In theory, you should be able to lock at any moment. Just a thought. Same thing with monitoring. If the site's doing well, ease up on your monitoring. If they're doing poorly, tighten up on it. But monitoring more often doesn't necessarily equal more quality. It just means you're doing more monitoring. Okay. These are personal findings. I find quality tends to be the most overlooked department. A lot of companies look at quality as a direct cost, sometimes to the detriment of not having quality department, having one person. They tend to be the most common finding in audits and in FDA inspections. Again, the perception of running counter to progress, and the fact that having SOPs aren't good enough. You have to show that you're actually using your SOPs, looking at your SOPs, considering your SOPs. There's more to it than just writing processes. Okay, so clinical data quality, and I appreciate everybody hanging in there. So we're going to talk about regulations, ICH and GCP, and data integrity. Okay, so U.S. regulations. What are we talking about? You're probably looking at all of these with the exception of the GMP and the device people because your quality is a little bit easier to understand. It's direct. You're looking at these and going, well, these aren't quality. These just say what I have to do. Well, in essence, that's what quality is. Quality is achieving the goal that the agency set for you. So quality data isn't defined anywhere. And the reason why there's an asterisk is because that unless you're doing GMP or GLP or devices, anything more on the manufacturing side, because the production cycles are pretty well developed. But no one's going to tell you how you have to design your EDC system aside from 21 CFR 11 compliance. It's really up to you. What's your quality data look like? It should be error-free. It's not a lot of guidance. So you kind of have to think about, the other things that lead into it. Just to note, this is just for people, 21 CFR 11. Just understand that these are requirements that you have to have for electronic systems that are doing an FDA-regulated activity. They were designed to parallel HIPAA. HIPAA talks about privacy of electronics. electronic systems. And really when it comes to research, it just kind of says that it applies to research. So, there are some differences between HIPAA and CFR 11, but for the most part, 11 kind of gets you pretty almost all the way to HIPAA compliance. Okay, so ICH E6 GCP was written in 1994. Has not gotten the same updates that labs, manufacturing, and so on and so forth have gotten. Has had a couple explanations written. For the most part, we're kind of going to see the same thing. So what is it? It's a quality standard for basically the production of clinical research data to provide assurance that the data and the results are credible and accurate, and also that patients' rights are well respected. Couple principles. All information should be handled and stored in a way that allows reporting, interpretation, and verification. A lot of you may know this as ALCOA or GDP, Good Documentation Practice, which is basically the idea that information should be accurate, legible, organized, so on and so forth. And this wonderful nugget of information that says systems with procedures that assure the quality of every aspect of the trial should be implemented. Again, fantastic, but not really any guidance as to how to do those systems. So there's specific regulations in that. Basically the idea that the sponsor is responsible for maintaining quality. E6 goes further to say you should have written SOPs. The FDA says you should have a quality management system. Doesn't actually tell you, that you should have SOPs or anything like that. The BIMO manual, which is the Bioresearch Monitoring Manual, will go on to talk about the absence of quality, but not necessarily what constitutes presence. And I'll learn about quality control. Again, just basically says that it should be there. Okay, so again, quality data not defined in international regulations or any guidance either. Can't speak for every single country's iteration of the FDA, but most avoid defining what quality data is. And again, the asterisk there for GMP, GLP. So you might be asking yourself, what now? So basically, everyone tells you you should have a quality operation. No one tells you what a quality operation is or how to do it. So that's where we're going to come into play, and we're going to take some of these quality approaches and look at data. Quick note on regulatory documentation of quality. You're essentially talking about two different groups. The inspector, who is the on-the-ground person looking at your trial master file or investigator site file, depending on where they go, and the reviewer, who is the person in the regulatory agency, a member of a team, obviously, considering what you've submitted. Now, note that for the most part, inspectors really look at precision. That is, did you follow your SOPs? Did you achieve the goals you set out to do? Did you protect subjects? Did you look at SOP? Did you look at safety events in the same mechanism, so on and so forth? Reviewers are really concerned with accuracy. Basically, did your project do what it was supposed to do? So, this kind of ties us into some of the earlier stuff. Both do retrospective reviews. The reason why I say the reviewer is controlled, the reviewer is not coming to you. They have a list. They provide you with a list of what they want. You give it to them in the manner in which they request. The inspector is uncontrolled because they're going to show up and they're going to look at whatever they feel like looking at. You can look at the BIMO guide, which is available on the FDA website, to get an idea as to what they look for, but really it's up to them to look at whatever they want to when they show up, with the exception of financial information and quality operations. A list of them, but not the actual reports themselves. You can keep your dirty laundry to yourself. unfortunately, you often have to use those quality operations to defend changes that were made. So just a thing to be aware of. And I want you to basically look at the results that you can get of an inspection. With an inspector, basically you get either no action, voluntary action, or required action indicated. Nowhere in there is did a great job. So that's an idea on compliance and why sort of, taking that extra 4,000% to move up 3% of quality may not be worth the trade. And the same thing with the reviewer. They really either, there are more options as in they refuse to file, they accept with changes and so on and so forth. But basically, it's either good or it's bad, and there are no bonus points for doing extra. Although I guess in the case of children's research, you can get that extra 6 months at the FDA, but that's neither here nor there. So data quality. My definition I'm taking from the National Academy. And again, quality data is basically defined as data that is sufficiently able to report conclusions and interpretations equivalent to those derived from error-free data. So there's no perfect data set. Good clinical data management. The Society of Clinical Data Management has an excellent handbook on the A to Z's of this. Obviously, for proprietary reasons, I can't post that here. It's a great manual to have. If you don't have it, I get my hands on it. Whether you're a data manager or you're working in more of the clinical arena, it's good to get their perspective. Okay. So data quality lifestyle. Funny because this looks like pretty much every other quality picture we've seen. So just think about that and how you can apply those approaches. I'm personally going to apply more of a blended approach. I tend to lean more towards the lean and Kaizen approaches, but you do need to do a little bit more of the Six Sigma command and conquer kind of thing, because there are places where you should solicit user input, but you necessarily don't want to let your users run the operation unless your user happens to be the FDA or another regulatory agency. Then assuming they don't ask anything crazy of you, you do want to let them run it. Key principles. Okay. Big picture. What do you want at the end of it? At the end of it, you want a successful trial. Don't get too bogged down in minutia, and pay attention to important details. Honestly, your protocol, your CRF, and your data management, and monitoring includes data management, are your most important details. User risk management perspective. Identify major risks. Plan for contingencies. One of my specialties when I monitored was basically looking at protocols and figuring out how to break them. It's a good operation. You figure out where your problem areas are, and you either change them or you figure out how you're going to minimize that impact or not use it to your effect. I'm sure you wouldn't be surprised to know that many CRFs run counter to each other, and many SOPs run counter to each other. So it's best to be aware of those before going into a process, rather than writing up protocol violations for things that shouldn't be protocol violations, because you don't have the option of deciding something's not a violation when you've already kind of created a system where it has to be one. So the big picture, what is it? Primary objectives of the protocol. You pharma people are much better at this than you academic people. If you have a study and you're trying to figure out the effect of a drug on blood pressure, that primary endpoint should be blood pressure. Secondary endpoints, also should be a primary safety endpoint, which is basically, nothing tremendously bad will happen while people are on this drug. Secondary endpoints are going to be things related to it. So normal EKG, you might, heart rate, things related to that. You might have some other major planned analyses. you can't do everything in one study. Just understand that from the get-go, accept it. It's frustrating because these are really expensive investigations, and you think you should be able to do more. In reality, you can't. And the more you try to do, the worse or the less reliable you make every other outcome. So how much data are we talking about? This is just a perspective here, but from 8 clinical trials, typical phase 3 trial of primary HIV is collecting more than 1,000 data items per subject, only 100 of which appear in published reports or are requested in NDAs. So that's a lot of work to collect, to use only 10% of your data. And from DIA, essentially, the more complicated you make a CRF, the harder it is for sites to do it, the less likely they are to be cooperative, and the less successful you are in getting the data you want. So think about that. That's thinking about the end user. So some general considerations. Can't reiterate this too often. Everything should be focused around your primary endpoints, and then secondary and other planned analyses. Don't decide to toss in, a 30-minute psychological evaluation because it sounds like fun or it's interesting. It's going to wreck your trial. Build in support mechanisms. QC, if you do like data QC, which is where a second person is reviewing the data entry one person did, don't rely on that to be your only system. Or monitoring. Don't allow monitoring to be the only thing. And validate this process. Like, validation is not something you just do on a computer system. You also validate monitoring activities to make sure they work. I remember looking at a trial once and realizing that in order to do monitoring per the monitoring plan that was developed, we would have to do and something on the order of like 200 hours each per site. And we were only really allotted about 60. So, that obviously was not a system that was going to work. And think about risk management and the use of audits. There's some program considerations. So the overall quality of a program is an average of its components. And by that I mean, if your phase 1 is awful, and your phase 2 is okay, and your phase 3 is excellent, you can't do any better than okay, because it's going to be viewed by the agency as a combination of your efforts. So don't start off on a bad note. Think about it as a longitudinal process. Doesn't mean that if something didn't work that you can't go in and do the next round better, but no one's going to, if you had a problem and you fixed it, someone coming to look at your data is still going to say you had a problem. Quality's got to be planned in advance. Can't be added retroactively. I do a lot of FDA mock audits, and the sad truth of those is that while I can point out information the FDA will talk about, I can't show you how to fix things that have already been broken. So think about that. And you want to document every significant decision and undertaking. If anybody ever questions you, how did you select your monitors, you've got a document that says, this is what I looked for, this is what I did. Just a perspective on sources of error. Not going to go through these, just for your viewing pleasure. And now I want to talk about the data quality lifecycle. So I'm really breaking it down into 4 separate sections, the majority of which is going to focus on the first 2. 3 and 4 tend to be done by regulatory and QA. 3 tends to be done by stats. 1 and 2 do need to be done by most of the research people. So that's what we're gonna dive into. All right. So design and development. Really want to talk about vendor selection, transfer of regulatory obligations, otherwise known as TORO, study development, and training and preparation. All right, vendor selection. I cannot stress that this is the most important decision you will ever make. Again, if we look at marriage, if you pick the wrong person and you try to be the best spouse possible, the system is already broken. It's not going to work. You pick bad vendors, you can't work around, well, you might be able to spend extra work to work around their badness, but you're not going to necessarily achieve a high-quality outcome, at least not at the cost that you should be getting it at. This should be really defined as a sponsor function, or if you're doing it at a CRO, the CRO needs to have a vendor selection program. That's why I say this can either be QC or QA. I do a lot of vendor audits, more than happy to do them. And it's good because sometimes sponsors are, sort of so they're so excited about a vendor they can't see the bad things. I think as a kid, my parents would make me do this because I'd get really excited about some expensive thing I didn't want and they didn't want to buy, and they would help me see that I didn't want it and they didn't want to buy it. It's a good approach towards vendors selection. This should be documented in detail. If you're going to select a vendor, now what I'm not saying is you don't have to necessarily catalog why you picked one vendor over 4 other vendors. That's a great approach. But you need to say why you picked your one vendor. And really do this before you sign a contract, because otherwise vendors selection tends to get minimized. And you don't want to sort of be doing vendor selection after the fact, especially if you find a problem. Key vendors. You really have 2. You have a CRO and you have an investigator. If you're the sponsor, you should be getting approval of each. You really need to know what your input is, how they're going to talk to you, and how they're going to organize things. You don't want to be that sponsor who's surprised that their CRO actually uses contract monitors and a contract data group and a contract lab, and that they don't really have anything in-house. Make sure you know that going into it, and figure out how they're going to manage the quality of those people, and especially make sure they end up doing the if they're going to use other vendors, and you're the sponsor. If you can, you shouldn't be paying for those vendor selection efforts. They should, because it's their choice to use your vendors. Now, you select a vendor and come into a CRO, that's a different situation. Same with investigators. They are vendors. I know it's hard sometimes because a lot of investigators tend to have a lot more control than I think sponsors would like them to have, but they are vendors, and they should be qualified in the same manner. There should be an investigator's selection. There should be written criteria for the selection of an investigator and why you picked the ones that you picked. 2 most common findings for sponsor is lack of investigator oversight. Findings for investigators are lack of investigator oversight. As a sponsor, unfortunately, you end up being at fault for everything that happens. So even if you aren't directly involved, be aware, get involved. Vendor plans. These are all optional, but I recommend using as many as will work in your organization. They should have a statement of work. Work orders should come off of that statement of work. Communications plan should dictate how often they're going to get in contact with you and what kind of information they'll provide you, like metrics. You should have a safety management plan for each study. Should be a data analysis plan for each study. Safety and data you can't really get around. Those are kind of required. But quality plan and a quality agreement are definitely things that you should think about. And it's always nice to be able to hold somebody's feet to the fire via a list of expectations. It also gives you the ability to say what your expectations are, which, believe it or not, few people actually do that. Talk about whose SOPs are going to be used and document this. When people ask me to do audits, we always talk about what SOPs do you want to use. If I use their SOPs, I become part of their system. If they use mine, then they become part of my system. TORO, transfer regulatory obligations. regulatory agencies require you to do this in the 1572 or equivalent forms. But it's not bad to have a separate agreement where you actually dictate what those terms are. I mean, you really should. And understand that you can retain a responsibility but still have someone else who's part of the process. And when you talk about a major quality no-no, it's being responsible for something you have no control of. So just giving an example of AE reporting, which the sponsor has to do, the CRO, the sponsor's agent, is where the awareness of the event counts. However, you might be waiting on the CRO to actually do the work, which is something the sponsor directly can't do. Think about that. Describe it in work orders. All right. Study development. Literally second most important part, or I could say almost as equal as vendor selection. The protocol is the study. It is the lifeblood of the study. Keep it simple. Keep it with a laser focus. Make sure that you're collecting data you actually need to collect. Make sure that you're using things for either analysis or safety. Don't do exploratory research. And look at your visits. Does your visit need to be 11 hours long? Does your visit need to include 10 blood draws? A lot of people just sort of design protocols thinking, without really thinking about the logistics of what they're doing. That's a big no-no. CRFs. These are the items used to populate your database. So in essence, they are the study. Again, focus on the protocol. Focus on safety. Organize visits so that they make sense. Don't don't give somebody a pile of safety forms and a pile of physical exam forms. Organize them in visit 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. You've got standardized forms that work. Adverse event, serious adverse event, CONMEDs. Keep them as is. There's no reason to fix something that isn't broken. Pilot these forms and pilot them with sites, with monitors, and I recommend having an auditor look at your study as well. Always good to have a third set of eyes. These things may seem like costly things, but if you think about it, it's better to spend a small amount of money to ensure a well-oiled machine than it is to call somebody in to replace parts after they've already been broken. And also include time for system validation. Paper electronic CRFs. I'm always a big fan of electronic CRFs and direct data entry. Paper tends to have more of a complicated flow. In general, the more steps you have, the more opportunity for errors. But it's going to be dependent on your budget and your experience, and these are just some things to think about when you're doing this. Sorry, just waiting for this to load. Okay. This is just a reiteration of 21 CFR 11. Your EDC system has to do this, so make sure when you're designing forms that you have this in mind. So that's thinking about validation. And I really can't stress engaging users. We talked about sort of users involved in the quality process. You can't go to the FDA and say, what kind of an EDC system do you want? But you can have coordinators pilot things out. And a testing system isn't piloting. It's a training system. So, engage more than just your internal staff. Lots of times they're really happy and really excited to get involved because it makes them a part of the group. Have monitors look at it. They're going to have to go in and enter queries. Have statisticians look at it. Are we collecting data in the manner of which you can analyze? I was once on a study where we saved a significant research effort by realizing that the statistician was going to have to analyze two different data points that collect the same information in two totally different ways, so they could actually contradict each other. It's a good fix to find. And again, having an auditor come in and pilot it, always a good idea. Logistical questions. Who's doing it? When you want to look at data? Where is it going to be collected? How much time? So on and so forth. Don't just necessarily think about, getting forms that give you data that you want. Think about the other stuff you want to do. If you want to analyze data, at a moment's notice, you want forms that don't have to be, you don't want to have a cleaning process that takes weeks. The spot. Database design. These are just some really good features. CDMS is a clinical database management system, basically the quality management system as applied to clinical data. Again, the less control of the database you put in the hands of the entry people, the easier it is to fix situations from your end. But you want to make sure it's sort of idiot-proof. You don't want to have really complicated forms that somebody can't just readily enter information on. If data is collected at 2 decimal points, save yourself the trouble and design a system that's able to recognize two decimal points. You don't have to sort of institute rounding rules. Missing values, it's going to happen. Make sure that a missing value doesn't create a 7-tiered query system that requires management approval to get passed. And make sure the queries are understandable. I once remember beating my head against the wall only to realize that my query was because I had an extra space in there. It's a difficult thing for a user to figure out. And the better and easier your design is, the easier it's going to be to validate 21 CFR 11. Source documentation. People don't think about what their source documentation is, and they should. Now, granted, if somebody's writing information down on a napkin, you don't have control over that. But CROs and sponsors should dictate what their source is, particularly if they want correct data entry, as in they want the entry system to be the source. How many times have you gone to a site and you've seen that the site's created a separate flow sheet? Well, now they have to go flow sheet to CRF to system, adding an extra step and making it very easy for transmission errors to happen. Also requires longer to monitor sites like that. Things to think about. Why would a sponsor or a CRO allow the site to dictate what source is going to be? It's a consideration that they should really take. So, risk management. This is your QA, QC. Think about what you're good at. Look at what you're doing, what you're not doing, and try to think about like a blended approach. Use a layered approach, as in you've got data management doing QC, you've got monitoring doing QC, you've got auditors coming in every 3 months or 6 months or 1 year doing QA. You've got an external company looking at your SOPs, so on and so forth. You don't necessarily need, there are cheap things and there are expensive things. Expensive thing is designing a second computer system to do QC when you've got a person who can do it in roughly the same amount of time. Overemphasizing one approach, as in data QC or monitoring QC, is just, again, like your return on investment is just going to be marginalized. 12 monitoring visits aren't necessarily better than 8 monitoring visits if the monitor's doing, an appropriate job. Categorizing risks. Again, risk management plans. Reg risks, big deal. Safety, data integrity, business risks. These are things like monitors who don't have a good relationship with sites. We all live on our reputation. So think about the effects different things can happen. Think about the likelihood, the severity. I mean, in auditing, we tend to go critical, major, minor. We tend to look at risks for things that could happen as well as things that already have happened. And try to think about how easy it would be to find some of these problems. If somebody was falsifying data, do you think it'd be hard to find, or do you think it'd be easy to find? If somebody was, making transcription errors, would that be hard to find or easy to find? Things like that. Standardization. Standardize everything you can. Organize it so it makes sense. Studies have a start and a finish. And you should organize your approach in the same way. Communications should be organized. You have calls every 2 weeks. You have an issue escalation plan that goes from bottom to top and doesn't allow people to skip people in the middle. Document everything of significance, and I do mean of significance. Telephone logs are okay. They are kind of overkill if they're just capturing casual conversations. But if that's how if that's how you find out that an investigator has enrolled a subject who's ineligible, it's a different thing. But again, I kind of always ask people to, whatever we talk about on the phone, email me and I will send you an okay back. You don't need to categorize. You don't need to put every single email in those systems either. It's amazing. You find people who have documented every study email but never written an explanation as to why they picked a CRO. And they've gotten faulted on improper CRO selection. How would they defend themselves? Okay. SOPs. You got to commit to making them, following them, training on them, and documenting that they were followed. This is key. If you write an SOP and you say you're going to do something and you don't do it, document that you didn't do it, or change your SOP, because this is how you say you're going to operate, and you don't get the ability to go in and casually decide if you don't want to do something. So, in kind of thinking about that, be realistic. Does an SAE that doesn't meet reporting requirements need to be reported to you in 1 business day? It'd be great, but 3 is much more realistic. Does data entry need to happen in a day? It could, but do you want to hand out protocol deviations for not doing it in a day? If you say you're going to do a monitoring visit every 3 patients, do you want to give yourself a deviation for going every 4 patients, without that flexibility? You don't need a procedure for it. Don't make a procedure for it. And it's really important because it's very easy to put yourself in a situation where you're in violation of your own rules. Don't do that. Monitoring and auditing. Quick note on this. Make the monitoring plan match the study. Come in the beginning, come every so many patients, come at the end to make sure things are clean. Don't have people show up when there's been no progress. Try not to make it a disruptive activity. Let sites know that monitors just need a quiet room and the ability to have somebody to answer questions. Let monitors know that their role is not to shut down the presses and monitor, the for-cause being exception and initiation being exception. But it should be a seamless process. What are you using monitoring and auditing for? Auditing shouldn't be thought of as a part of the study team. It should be thought of as somebody's going to come in and look at this information from an unbiased viewpoint and tell us how things are going, especially how is the monitor going. Okay. All right. Training. Get the sites involved in training. Get the monitors involved in training. Get everyone involved in training. They love it. It's free labor from sites for most of the time. and they help you find errors that you didn't know existed. Invest time in training. Make sure that's sure you do it right so that you don't have questions come up that you could have easily trained around. Define your expectations and what kind of metrics you're gonna test. This is so important. You can't hold somebody responsible for not doing something that you didn't tell them they had to do. And explain what the issue escalation plan is and what punitive damages will be there. It's not bad, but the sort of a fear into people that their mistakes can be criticized. Data collection, next phase. So initiation, collection, cleaning, and closure. Initiation. If you can, if you got the time, you have 20 sites, pick 2 and pilot them. Let them make mistakes and retrain, fix the data system, whatever you need to do so that the other sites don't do that. This is hard sometimes because you're under deadlines to finish research, but believe me, it will save you so much time in the long term if you just kind of get your kinks worked out first. I'm not a big fan of remote initiation because I like to see how the site set up their study and what they're going to do. If you're going to do it, make sure it's a thorough process. Don't initiate sites that have known quality issues. Trust your gut. Although I will say this, it is much easier to fix the quality operations of a high-performing site than it is to fix the performance problems of a high-quality site. And that is, if they recruit well for you, if you've got the money, it's almost worth your while to have a monitor basically act as their QC. It's not preferred, but it's a lot easier than trying to fix a really good site and help them find patients. That's their job. They should know how to do that. And don't be afraid to request remediation if you find problems. I find very often that sponsors and CROs sort of live in fear of their investigators, where they want to downgrade findings, and it is true they do exert a lot of control in the process, but they also are doing a job for you. And I don't say that as an insult to investigators or anyone. It's just that understand what the business relationship is, and don't be afraid to state what your concerns are. Data collection. A couple notes about monitoring. Why are you doing it, and why are you source data verifying every single person? Government doesn't do it, and they tend to have very high confidence rates in their data. It's not a bad thing to look at primary and secondary outcomes and primary, secondary, and safety and do a scattering of things for other sites. You can do less monitoring and do more auditing. That's a great approach to do. Just a couple notes. Identifying a problem doesn't mean you solve it, and fixing a problem yourself isn't preventative, because if you tell the site that you'll be there to pick up the pieces, then they've got no problem making that mistake. Kind of goes back to the old teach a man to fish, so on and so forth. And just note on auditing. Most of the time, people bring in auditors to look at sites after the trials are already done. You should bring them in. You should bring them in the middle. You should bring them in the beginning. Their frequency can be something like 1/4 of that of monitors, but having them come in frequently and often allows you to examine efforts from someone else's viewpoint. And co-monitoring is not auditing. It's simply, peer review, really. So just think about that. You want to know what your monitor is doing. Data cleaning. What does cleaning mean? And I think of cleaning, I think of fixing errors. So those QC efforts that data management is doing, that's data cleaning. The auto queries and the data management queries, that's cleaning. Monitoring, that's cleaning. If you do it well, you shouldn't hit the end of a study and have to spend 4 months cleaning data. You should be able to move rather seamlessly into database locks. So don't plan on cleaning as being something you do at the very end of it. Think of it as something that you incrementally do throughout it. Also allows you to identify other quality problems. Think about the roles. Who's doing what? Are they working together? Are they talking to each other? Data managers should give lists of queries to monitors before they go on visits. They shouldn't be siloed. Analysis. How many are you doing? Do the statisticians know what the protocol looks like? Do the statisticians know what monitors are doing? Using data lock. Using hard dates to speed cleaning. Set your lock far in advance, and a month or two beforehand say, okay, we're really going to get intensely get into database cleaning. Don't sort of keep your lock as sort of a nebulous state. The SAP, or the statistical analysis plan, a lot of times that might get developed mid-trial. I recommend trying to do that as close to the beginning of the trial, once you get sort of that first round of data as possible. And don't be, your SAP may affect your monitoring or the protocol itself. So have your statisticians talk to monitors. Have people communicate so that they understand what each other are looking for. Reporting. Reporting, I really think of like developing your submissions, your CSRs, your NDA documents. I see oftentimes we hit reporting and there's a lot of pressure, and this being an incredibly critical period of time ends up getting relatively smushed in comparison to the others. Try to set some adequate timelines for that, and don't sort of have your reporting be your buffer where you make up time. Engage auditors early to, if you're using people in CSR review, engage them early. Don't have them come in after version 5 of the document's been written. Have them come and look at draft 1. And if you're using a vendor for reporting, again, with all vendors, qualify them before you sign a contract. Because when you do it in reverse, you basically end up fixing problems that you identify instead of being able to reject someone for having too many problems, which is a bad situation to be in. Okay, so that's clinical data quality. I know it was kind of a brief sprint through it. I hope that you kind of take away some general thoughts on some of the things that I mentioned, that you can think of some of these quality approaches and sort of see how they apply to your organization. All of them don't work everywhere. They're not intended to. And if you have a quality management system, how do you make it better? If you don't have one, how do you get one? So some final thoughts. Understand that regulation and guidance don't tell you what quality is. They just say you have to have it. So you're given a lot of freedom as to how you want to do this. Quality is something that's simultaneously always there and invisible. And I say if you did it the right way, no one should know that you were that you even had to be a part of the process. This is going to be a little unorthodox, but should you even be doing quality? If it's something your organization is not very good at, it's something it's perfectly fine to outsource to a vendor who is good at it. The same thing with tasks. If you've got one auditor or one person in charge of quality and umpteen sites and umpteen vendors, it's not very feasible to have that person go out and do all your quality operations. You should have someone else doing it. There's nothing wrong with having your entire group actually being outsourced as well. So something to think about. So that concludes my presentation. I am open for Q&A.
Hey, Nick, thanks so much for that presentation. You covered a lot of ground, and I want to let the folks on the line know that we will be sending them the presentation so they can have that to go over in some detail. We're out of time for questions, but I encourage the people on the line to fill out our survey. That's really helpful for us. And that wraps things up. My thanks to Nick and to the audience participants, and happy holidays.
Thank you, Jeff.